Senator Roy Blunt, the junior senator from the great state of Missouri. Senator, welcome back to Big 550 KTRS.
Hey, McGraw, great to be with you, and thanks for what you do on the air every day. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you very much. Do you think at some point here after the election that the Democrats and the Republicans can at least bury some of the hatchet to try and get something done in the Senate?
Yeah, I think we have to, and I'm optimistic about what happens after the election. Now, to be truthful, I'm reasonably optimistic about the election, too. I think the American people are looking at the economy, and they're looking at our energy policies and our health care policies and the tax discussion, and realizing that where the current administration's heading is not going to do the right things economically. So I think there are going to be some changes in Washington. But if they're not, I see this as a really important moment. It's kind of a generational choice, and we've got to get to work. I'd like to do it right now, but I'm not so optimistic that I think it's going to happen right now. But I do think after the election that there's an understanding that we can't continue to put these things off, that they have to be dealt with, and you can only kick this can down the road so far, and I think November is far enough and probably too far, but I can't do anything about that. I'm in the minority in the Senate. The Senate hasn't passed a budget in 3 years. You can't do the other work unless you're prepared to say what your plan is, and hopefully the country's going to look at Election Day and decide whatever they decide, and then the people that work for them are going to act on those decisions.
Let's assume all things work out rosy for you and your party. Let's say Mitt Romney wins. You gain seats in the House, and you retain or take over the Senate. You're not going to have 60 votes, and so you're going to have to deal with some Democrats. They could play the stall game too, and so it's sort of a never-ending kick the can down the road, as you say.
Well, that's why I don't understand why Harry Reid, the majority leader in the Senate now, won't bring a budget to the floor, because you can do a lot of things in the Senate with 51 votes, but you can only do them within the budget window and through the budget. And clearly that's what we're going to have to do to get the situation in place where we could do things about the health care plan and about tax policy. And then once you get that budget passed, and that's the moment you reach out to Democrats again, and I'm beginning to do as much of that as I can right now, and say, okay, we have the way to do this. We don't want to do it with 51 votes. We'd like to do it permanently with 60 votes. Won't you help us? And I'm talking to members about that right now. It's one of the things I think I can do in the Senate, is try to help get the Senate and the House in a place where you can actually pass legislation that begins to solve some of these problems, and I am absolutely committed to doing that.
Are you hearing anything about the Supreme Court and their decision on that affordable health care?
No. I had one team left in the Final Four at the end of the tournament, so I'm not the best predictor here, and I'm not a lawyer. I've never tried to predict the court. I don't know what the court will decide. We believe that decision will come on one of the weeks. It certainly will happen by the end of June, and may happen sometime even before that. But it'll be interesting to see. Now, the White House yesterday announced that they'd entered into a $20 million PR contract for some company between now and Election Day to be talking about how great the Affordable Health Care Act is. I hope they have an escape clause in that contract if the court decides that it's not only not all that great, but more importantly unconstitutional. And then there's another over $8 billion that the White House and the Department of Health and Human Services is spending to postpone one of the things until after the election that will really affect seniors on Medicare, where Medicare Advantage won't go away until after the election. My guess is that when people begin to look at that sort of thing, they're going to be further outraged about what's happening with health care and how the administration's approaching health care.
If the Supreme Court calls it unconstitutional, and if that's unconstitutional, they also rule that they throw the whole thing out. What happens to the 24-year-old who is getting insurance on their parents' insurance plan because of that law? Do they wake up the next day and just not have insurance?
Well, they've got insurance, and the company has decided to insure them, and that would last for a little while. I believe that's one of the things that the Congress would surely reinstate. That was my bill in the House, McGraw. Nobody else offered that bill. I thought it was a way to get a significant number of the uninsured into an insurance group with not much cost. You know, young people are generally healthy. They think they don't need insurance. They don't buy insurance. And often they're right. They don't need it. That was my bill. I'm the only person that introduced that legislation. It's one of the things I think should continue to be the case. It's the one thing that we will not do if I have anything to do with it is we will not pass another 2,600 or 2,000 page health care bill ever. You can do these in bites that people can understand. That could be one of them. I've been in a couple of meetings lately, and there's some general understanding that that's one of the things that you'd want to go back and take that little bill that I offered in 2007 or 8, take that little bill and make it the law, and we can do that. And there are other things like that as well. But getting this law off the books would be the best thing, because it takes 60 people to get rid of it, just like it took 60 people in the Senate to pass it. Now, 51 people next year could decide not to fund it and postpone it until we convince people there's a better plan, but it would be better for this law to be off the books. There are really 3 questions here, I think, that ought to be asked. If the answer to any of them is no, we shouldn't do it. One is it constitutional? 2 is it a good idea? And 3 is, can we afford it? And I happen to think the answer to all 3 of them is no. But if the court decides it's you can do a lot of things that are constitutional that aren't a good idea. I'm just as opposed to it if it's constitutional as I am if the court says it's not constitutional, because it's a bad idea, and we clearly can't afford to pay for it.
But you do at least like that one line that says 24-year-olds and those young adults can get insurance on it.
We went to 26. The current law was 22. You had to keep kids on insurance if families wanted to do that. They were 22. I believe it's 22 weeks. I expanded it to 26. That became part of the bill, and I was for it then, and I'd be for it now.
Breaking news here, Senator.
There are other, like expanding high-risk pools so that people who don't have insurance have a place to go, and figuring out a way to keep that insurance in a high-risk pool so it's relatively affordable.
Aren't those state exchanges they keep talking about? Isn't that part of that?
No, those are not. The state exchanges are where everybody goes and gets insurance. The high-risk pool is where people that already have a health care problem, not to have, or for whatever reason didn't have insurance, can go. You do run a risk when you decide you're not going to have insurance. And a lot of those, that occasional young person who believes they're not going to need health care, doesn't get it, and then they have a terrible accident, or they have a unique illness that most young people don't have. This high-risk pools give them somewhere to go that is somewhere close to normal insurance, but there may be a little bit. I think 135% of normal was the goal of getting the high-risk pool for someone who, for whatever reason, thought they could get by with insurance and then got sick. Or somebody who just couldn't afford to have insurance. Though remember, people who are the poorest among us have insurance through Medicaid in most states. So this is not the very poor who have insurance, but people who thought they could get by without it, and as it turned out they couldn't, would have a place to go in these high-risk pools. It's in the law. It hasn't been As it turned out, it wasn't used nearly as much as the president thought it would be, because people still have to pay for insurance, and they either can't afford to do that, or in the numbers that the president thought, people haven't chosen to get insurance that way if they had a pre-existing condition.
Senator Blunt, we're going to have to leave it there. You're busy. We got to move on, check sports, but thanks for checking in. Be safe, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Hey, great to talk to you. See you soon, my friend.